So I think I need to do something about the lighting for my videos, because when the blinds are shut, it's really kind of dark and drowned out colour-wise in here. But when the blinds are open, half of my face is lit up. So yeah, anybody who's been doing YouTube for a while, if you have any tips on lighting, let me know. So Mission Impossible Fallout is out next week. It's out next week. Get too ahead of myself. Really excited. So I thought now is a good time to go back over the last 5 Mission Impossible movies and to see how they hold up, if I still enjoy them as much as I thought I did. It's been a long time since I've watched them all through. I haven't seen the 5th one since the cinema, actually. So yeah, looking forward to seeing these all again. Which means we're starting obviously with the first one. The first Mission Impossible, which came out in 1996, 22 years ago. 22 years ago. Does anybody else kind of feel that time has some kind of personal vendetta against them? 22 years.
Put the bunny back in the box.
Starring, amongst others, Tom Cruise, Jon Voight, Henry Czerny, Emmanuel Burt, 2 names probably screwed up, Jean Reno, Ving Rhames, Kristen Scott Thomas and Vanessa Redgrave. Directed by Brian De Palma off of a screenplay by David Cope and Steven Zaillian. This is my review for the first Mission Impossible movie. So the Mission Impossible movies it's a franchise I really, really love. And it's a strange one because I'm never overly, until this one actually, I've never been overly excited to go and watch one of these films, but whenever I do, I'm always blown away by them. I always absolutely love them. And I don't know why I haven't gone back and watched some of the earlier ones before now. I've just watched them as they've been released. Ghost Protocol, was that the 4th one? I think that was the 4th one. It's the only one I've watched twice. The rest of them, it's just been a one watch for me, and it's interesting going back and seeing them again, particularly this first one. Because the first Mission Impossible, whereas now they're very high on action sequences, it's a lot more about spectacle. With the first Mission Impossible, the spy aspect of the whole story is really the focus. It's much more of a spy drama thriller than it is an action thriller. And that's not to say there's not action moments in there, because there is, but as I say, the spy stuff is much more the emphasis here, and it makes for a very different sort of film to the later ones, at least in my mind. So the plot of this one, Ethan Hunt and his team, he's not the leader of the team, the leader is a man named Jim Phelps. They are mostly all killed off, with the exception of 1 or 2 of them, and a list of every single agent has been stolen, or at least they think it's been stolen. It actually transpires that the whole thing was a setup by the agency themselves to try and find a mole that's hidden within the agency itself. And because Ethan Hunt is one of the only people to survive, and this early on in the film they think he is the only person to have survived, he becomes the suspect. The agency, the IMF, they think that he is the mole. Therefore, he has to go on the run and try and find the real person behind it. And doing so, he meets some interesting people along the way and starts to form a new little team of his own. So with Tom Cruise now, we've come to accept that he's an action star. He's the guy who'll do the crazy stunts and just do ridiculous things, and we've seen a lot of that in these Mission Impossible movies, that he'll go to some extreme lengths, including breaking his own bones to try and pull off a stunt. But early on, in this first Mission Impossible, as far as I'm aware, he wasn't so much the action star. He'd had a couple of action roles, I think. Top Gun can be classed as an action, can't it? I think so. But nothing to the scale that he does now. And it's quite evident in this first one, because there's very little in the way of jaw-dropping, thrilling stunts. The action in Mission Impossible really does take a back seat. There are a couple of moments where it comes into play, but largely it's not until the final sort of 15-20 minutes where you get the whole train in the Channel Tunnel sequence that this feels like it could be something that's defined as an action film. And I mentioned this earlier, the rest of it is much more interested in delving into the life of a spy. And because of that, Mission Impossible, as I said, has a very different feel to the later movies in the franchise. This one is a much quieter affair. It feels a lot more character-driven. There's a lot of sort of investigating clues and trying to find out what's going on. Then there is giant explosions and things. And while that aspect of it is what I love about the later ones, here where it all begins, I think it was the right approach to take. And obviously at this point they didn't know where the franchise were going to go. They didn't know they were going to have Tom Cruise stuck to a giant building in Dubai 4 films down the line. But it allows you to get to know the character of Ethan. It allows you to get to know the IMF, to get to know the surroundings and who these people are. And I don't think you could have done that if it went straight in for high-octane action. But let's talk about some of the stunts that we do have. So the only two really, and I'm sure there are more, but the two that stand out, and with Mission Impossible movies there's normally a lot that stands out. I mean, the water sequence in the latest one, in the 5th one, amazing. But here there's only two that really jump out in my mind, and one is just chewing gum on a fish tank. But it's these little things, such as the chewing gum, that I love about Mission Impossible. Just the crazy little gadgets. And it's not exclusive to Mission Impossible. I mean, James Bond's been doing it for absolutely years, but it's just something very simple. Bit of chewing gum, green and red ends, stick them together, giant explosion. And it's used here on the fish tank in the restaurant when Ethan Hunt first goes on the run. And it's a great sequence, but it's the kind of action moment that doesn't feel overblown, and they do in later Mission Impossibles. I mean, it works for the franchise. I'm fine with overblown in these ones. But the explosion itself, maybe that's wrong, actually, because the fish tank exploding does cause what looks like a giant tsunami chasing him out of the restaurant. So maybe it was a little bit overblown, but the point is that it's a very simple thing. It's not a convoluted kind of action beat. It's just an explosion and then out comes a lot of water and fish. And it's a great moment. It's one that kind of sets the stage for what's to come in these films. And then you have, as I mentioned, the Channel Tunnel sequence, which, I mean, it seems a bit mean to say it feels dated now, because I don't really want to say it was 22 years ago again, but it was 22 years ago. But yeah, if you watch that sequence back now, at least for me, there are quite a lot of moments where it doesn't hold up. It doesn't feel authentic. It's very clear that there's a lot of CGI which has been used in this, and it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny all these years later. It seems a lot like models were used, and I, to be honest, don't know if it was or not. Maybe it was just the way it was shot, but I imagine they didn't really fly a helicopter through a tunnel. But I really am split when I'm watching that, because there are moments where I'm fully invested and it looks so real. And particularly the end, after he's used the explosion to propel himself back onto the front of the train, just the helicopter blades crashing towards him and just stopping just by his neck. It's such a great moment, such a really tense moment that you can kind of forgive just how silly it is. And maybe that is my thing with this first movie, is the fact that when you have this sequence, when you have Ethan Hunt on top of a high-speed train being chased by a helicopter going through a tunnel and fighting hanging underneath it, and the music, by the way, that plays here is incredible. As soon as the Mission Impossible music actually kicks in, it's amazing. But it just doesn't feel quite as authentic as I've come to get from these films. But as I say, it's just the first one. It's not something I can necessarily hold against it, because, as I say, it was a couple of years ago now that this one came out. But I imagine at the time, when you're first watching it, when you first see this on the big screen, it must have been a stunning thing to watch. And then there's the wire sequence. The bit where they're trying to steal the real data, the real list of all the IMF agents. And Ethan Hunt's hanging down on that room where you can't touch the floor. A tiny little drop of water will set the alarms off. And that whole thing, that whole sequence, is just as tense now as it was when I first saw it. I think it's one of my favourite sequences in the entire Mission Impossible franchise, because it's just executed so perfectly. There's so many different things in play. You've got the guy who they've poisoned to be sick. He could come back in any moment. You've got Tom Cruise hanging just above, hoping that beads of sweat just won't fall off onto the floor. You have, I can't remember the other guy now, the guy who turned out to be a bad guy in the end, and we'll get to him a bit more in a minute, but holding on to Tom Cruise at the top while the rat is coming towards him and he's struggling to keep hold of his grip. And then when he accidentally drops him and just literally inches above the floor, Tom Cruise stops and hangs. Everything about that whole scene is just played so well. Every single second of it. I can't fault anything in there. It's, as I say, one of my favourite scenes in the entire thing, and it's a masterclass in how to build tension and how to hold it. Just a fantastic scene all round. My issues with the first Mission Impossible, though, they stem from the characters, because other than Ethan Hunt, and to a degree Jim Phelps as well, I didn't really feel there was a lot of time to get to know many of the other ones. Claire is perhaps another one that we got a lot of time with, but you get other characters thrown in here, such as Ving Rhames' character, and I love Luther. Luther's brilliant, but here in the first one, he doesn't come into it until 50 minutes in, and he doesn't have a huge amount to do, and the same can be said as well for Franz. Franz comes in at the same time as Ving Rhames' character does and ends up double-crossing Ethan Hunt. And should I have said spoilers? It was 22 years ago, and I probably think I should have done. But there's not, I don't think, a great deal of time to feel anything about that portrayal, or to feel anything about the surrounding characters, because they come in quite late, and by the time they are introduced, so much is going on in the story that I don't want to say there's not room for them, but there's not room for them to develop. They're not given the time to develop, and that's just an unfortunate side effect of coming in 50 minutes into the movie. And it means that the team dynamic of the Mission Impossible franchise isn't really here in this first one. But this is Ethan Hunt's story at the end of the day, so I suppose it doesn't matter too much, and we'll see as these movies go on that the team focus becomes much more integral as this franchise continues. But yeah, here in the first one, it's much more an Ethan Hunt story than it is the Mission Impossible team. And again, I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism, I don't necessarily mean it as a complaint, because it's the choice that this movie's made, it's the choice that it's made to do, but just looking at it as somebody who's seen all of the films up to this point, it's certainly noticeable how much this is much more just Hunt than it is an ensemble piece. Although saying that, Ethan Hunt is still the focal point. He's still the main central attraction of all these films, seeing the things that he does and following this character. But normally he has a lot more people around him to bounce off. And there are times in this one where it just becomes a little, I don't want to say tiresome, but you don't know who to trust. You don't know who's on his side or not. And it makes it difficult to root for anybody else other than Ethan himself. But this is still a great film. It's still a brilliant start to the Mission Impossible world. I think the twist reveal that Jim Phelps is not only still alive, but also the mole all along is really well done. I absolutely love the scene where Ethan's on the phone at Liverpool Street Station, and then you just see this guy in a coat, and he turns around and you see it's him. And the way it's played out as well, the way the reveal's done, where it's almost ambiguous in a way. You have Ethan recounting what's his version, his idea of what's actually happened, but then you see what really happened play out sort of in Jim Phelps' mind, and then you realise that Ethan actually does know all along. It's just so well done. This script is so well written, and it's brilliantly directed by De Palma as well. Like, little moments like that one are just played out absolutely perfectly. So yeah, this does feel like a much more quieter affair for the Mission Impossible. It was, I say, it's been a long time since I've watched the first one, and going back to it now, it does seem a little strange to see that it is a lot more subdued, but I think for the first film it does definitely work in its favour, and this is still a film that I love a lot. I'm already planning, sort of when Mission Impossible 7 comes out, to just do another rewatch of all these things again, just to see, just to watch them all the way through, because they're movies that I don't think I'll ever really tire of. I'm going to give the first Mission Impossible movie an 8 out of 10. I'm actually off to watch Mission Impossible 2 now, which is an interesting one, because I remember absolutely loving Mission Impossible 2 and thinking it was so much better than 1, but I'm hearing lots of things from just reading up that Mission Impossible 2 was actually quite problematic and one of the worst, a lot of people say. So I'm interested to see what I think of it. Check it out now. The one thing I do remember is the hanging on to the rock scene, although I think I remember that more from the Ben Stiller spoof they did for the MTV Movie Awards. But yeah, look out for my video on that. There's reviews up now for Skyscraper, Incredibles, and The Secret of Marrowbone. Two of those films we got very, very late over here, but I did a review for them anyway. Movies at 20, we'll be back with The Mask of Zorro. Probably in the next couple of days, actually, I'll have that one up. And then Saving Private Ryan will follow that one. You can follow me on Twitter, at Joe Julians. Hit like, hit subscribe if you do enjoy just watching me ramble on for ages. I hope some of you do. And thank you very much for watching. I'll see you on the next video.